Good morning, and welcome to the Coastal Housing Coalition's second virtual workshop for our 2021 speaker series, Accessory Dwelling Units, a win-win solution for workforce housing. I'm John Standring, the president of Coastal Housing Coalition, and before we get started, I would like to take a moment to recognize all those who make this event possible. As we all know, housing has been a very hot topic, and CHC is very proud to be part of the conversation, and more so, hopefully, offering solutions to help make so everyone can be a part of our amazing community. I first would like to thank my fellow board members who volunteer their time and energy. Tony Tomasillo, our RM Design, today's moderator, Laura Bernard, the Cornell Collective, Barry Toffer, Simpler Systems, Krista Pleiser, Santa Barbara Association of Realtors, Chris Guillen, Brownstein Hyatt Farber Schreck, Ellen Bildstein, architectural and planner of Ellen Bildstein Architectural and Planning, John McCuskey, Guaranteed Rate, Brittany Stinner of Giordano's, our past president, Olivia Marr of Farber Large Archbold and Spray, and our executive director, Craig Minus. I appreciate all that you do, and really we appreciate you volunteering your time. I would like to thank our sponsors who, without their generous support, we would not be able to do what we do. Your generosity helps our organization put on events like this, and we look forward to continuing to grow these relationships so we continue to have great events. I'd like to say a special thank you to one of our title sponsors, Yardi, who have a quick video that they'd like to share. Thank you, Yardi. Our other title sponsor is Beachside Partners, Multifamily Advisors. I personally would like to give a very special thank you to my team of Nick Henry, Lori Zahn, and John Koskinen. It's a true honor to work with all three of you, and I'm really proud of all the work we're doing in our community and continuing to grow as a company. The Coastal Housing Coalition would also like to recognize our platinum sponsors, the Santa Barbara Association of Realtors, Cameron Pacific, and Farber Large Archbold and Spray. Thank you all again for your support and your generous offerings in helping us put on events like this. Quick housekeeping item. We'd like to let you know that if you have any questions, please send them in the comments so that you are able to get them to us so we can be able to have them answered at the end of the presentation for Q&A. All right, here we go. It's my pleasure to introduce fellow board member and today's moderator, Tony Tomasillo of RM Design. It's all yours, Tony.
Hey, thank you so much, John. I appreciate it. Super excited to be here today. I'll be moderating this discussion on accessory dwelling units and how they can be a win-win solution for workforce housing. My name is Tony Tomasillo. I'm with RRM Design Group, Senior Planner. I'm joined here today by an excellent panel of professionals from a wide range of different disciplines. We have Ann Wyatt, who's with Smart Share Housing Solutions in San Luis Obispo. We have Jimmy Paulding, who's Mayor Pro Tem with the City of Arroyo Grande. We have Rosie Deisty and Brenda Belts with the City of Santa Barbara, and Celeste Goyer with the Casita Coalition. Some of our workshop goals for today are really to understand ADUs within the context of our broader housing goals statewide and locally, to identify key challenges and trends of ADU production over the last few years as we've seen ADU implementation take place, to share best practices and strategies of ADU policy from locally in adjacent communities and across the state, and hopefully to inspire action toward comprehensive win-win ADU policies for our South Coast Santa Barbara County. So I won't spend too much time going over kind of what an ADU is. I'm assuming most of our audience does understand ADUs and their role in our community. But as we know, state ADU laws and amendments since the 2017 amendments have come forth, strengthening and facilitating ADU production. ADUs are one tool that the state has been using to help alleviate the housing crisis, including new housing element goals and RHNA allocations. For example, Santa Barbara County has a RHNA allocation of 24,000 units across the county, and the city of Santa Barbara specifically has about a third of that target. So as we've seen the sixth cycle housing elements begin to take shape, many jurisdictions are intending to utilize ADUs to achieve a large share of their RHNA goals. But as far as boots on the ground, people who are working to construct ADUs often find challenges and roadblocks to ADU construction. And those that do make it through the process, in many cases, these ADUs aren't necessarily being used to add to our rental housing stock in some cases. So I want to take a moment. I think it's important to differentiate between ADUs and AUDs, not only because it's a difficult acronym to keep in mind, and I'm sure many of us locally here get them mixed up often, but ADUs and AUDs or the multifamily higher density projects are sort of at opposite ends of the spectrum, and I think both have a place in our communities, and I think it's important to embrace sort of both sides of the spectrum as opportunities to help alleviate our housing goals, or help alleviate our housing issues. One of the problems with housing elements is that we typically see them as sort of paper housing or a plan for producing housing, but they don't often have the sort of teeth to get the housing built on the ground. And understanding that that's really just the sort of starting point for planning for that housing. But I do believe that it's incumbent on us as a community of professionals, nonprofit sector, and government to work together to craft policies and procedures to actually achieve those types of housing goals. And I'd like to reframe, if there's one thing that I could hope to come out of this, is that to reframe the conversation around ADUs as less of a loss of local control and more as an opportunity to embrace and achieve our broader local housing policy goals. So my questions sort of that I'd like to tackle today are: how can ADUs help achieve workforce housing in SB County? And what policies and strategies should we as a community of government, private, and nonprofit sector be considering to help achieve these goals? To help me answer those, again, we've got Ann Wyatt, who will be speaking about the SLO County ADU Task Force and some of the ADU trends in her community. Rosie Deisty and Brenda Belts, who will be walking through the Santa Barbara ADU ordinance and some of the challenges that they've seen in processing applications. Jimmy Paulding, who will be speaking about ADU challenges, solutions, and the role of community leaders in ADU policy. And finally, Celeste Boyer, who will be speaking about ADU implementation, best practices, and strategies from across the state. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Ann to get started.
Good morning. Let's see if I'm on here. Okay.
Oh,
Is
Ann.
my audio on it here? Okay.
I hear you, but I don't see you.
Yeah, my video link isn't connected from the host, it looks like. But that's okay, I think, as long as people can hear me. We can start with the slides since they're the main thing here. So thanks for the opportunity to join in this morning, Tony. And here maybe we've got the video going too. I was tasked this morning with helping people understand our process in San Luis Obispo for starting up our county ADU task force and to describe this group. And as executive director of Smart Share Housing Solutions, a nonprofit with an ADU program, we helped pull together a group of planners, builders, engineers, and technical people interested in ADU production. And so we convened the task force in 2021, and really with the aim to help the county meet its goals for creating around 400 ADUs every year. And as we know, and Tony aptly described, our paper calculations for housing don't always match with our reality. So we really want to help try to get there. And I'll show some slides of what San Luis Obispo County goals are soon. So the approach is a collaborative one. We also wanted to look regionally. We see the challenge where jurisdictions are trying to meet goals within their own borders, but it's really housing a more regional challenge beyond specific city borders. We have 7 cities in San Luis Obispo in the county making 8 different jurisdictions. So we can be more effective, we think, regionally. And we wanted to look at several different aspects of the challenge. Some of them are local policy challenges, some of them are state level policy challenges. So we wanted to balance an approach to be looking at both. We have a lot of long coastal zone, as you do in Santa Barbara. So some of our issues are coastal zone and coastal commission issues, and also to promote consistency in the process. We see a lack of consistency, a real challenge that homeowners don't even realize which jurisdiction they're in and can't tell one from another. Financing is a big challenge. And also then we wanted to try to promote some sense of accountability amongst government entities for actually meeting their targets. Next slide, please. And so with that, the group has met. Our mailing list is approximately 60 people in the task force. And the product of our first kind of spring meetings is an accessory dwelling unit white paper, kind of outlining the opportunity in the county and the challenges, which we'll just do a quick overview of here next. Next slide, please. So really this goal of our smart share activities are to help provide the variety of tasks that it takes for homeowners to create ADUs. So just briefly, this task list for us at our nonprofit program takes these multiple components, which I'll just run through very quickly here. The reality that we need outreach and education to help homeowners understand what's possible. That is particularly the case for lower income homeowners that don't realize what their opportunities are, and maybe don't realize that they can make ADUs happen and what's allowed. Similarly, technical assistance to help people understand, again, what's feasible. And that includes site visits for homeowners to go over what planning allows. Permitting, design, and construction assistance, um, managing contractors and professionals can be tricky for all of us, but maybe particularly out of reach for lower income homeowners. Affordability advocacy, we're trying to target smaller, less expensive ADUs. Lending and finance challenges are a real big one, particularly for lower income homeowners. And then a couple other aspects, which I'll skip over here, knowing time's limited. Next slide, please. So I just wanted to quickly note our targets here in San Luis Obispo County. I know in Santa Barbara you're working on your updated elements, and I looked at a current element for the county recently and saw interesting from a 2015 element that there were something like 100 ADUs targeted in that element. So I know your new element's going to have a lot of changes. This total of a little over 3,200 units is what the county and the 7 cities anticipate over our current element period in San Luis Obispo. Next slide. If we look into that a little more, it's very interesting how if we look at the moderate income category, that we expect around a third of the units of the ADUs produced to be moderate income affordable. And in general, then we expect to meet 62% of our moderate income RHNA requirement with ADUs. Next slide. When we look at low income units, the expectation is that around 50% of the ADUs produced will be low income affordable. And interestingly, then, if we go look at the box in the bottom right, what that suggests is that collectively our 7 cities and the counties expect over 100% of our low income affordable RHNA requirement could be produced through ADUs. So it's very interesting. Those percentages have quite a range. If you look at the far right yellow column there, from a quarter in some of our cities, San Luis Obispo, where rents are higher, up to 900% of expectations in some of our North County inland areas. So it's an interesting kind of range of expectations. Next slide. And so this summarizes those units, which I think I already pointed to enough, that there are a lot of variations in the expectations between cities. And that also has to do with market rent expectations in a lot of places. And what we really want to do is help people, homeowners, especially low income homeowners, figure out how to make a return on investment to make projects pencil out. And that means helping them focus on smaller, more affordable to build units, such as garage conversion. Next slide. So what we've seen is there's a real need for this outreach and education. And studies statewide have shown that jurisdictions really do need to educate their homeowners and pair this with technical assistance, and that there's a payoff. So this was a study done in our county showing this already in 2019, this need for education and outreach that in a lot of ways makes sense for nonprofits such as ours to be doing rather than planning departments, but that could certainly be in-house and work a lot of ways depending on what Santa Barbara County resources are available and nonprofits to cover some of that need. Next slide. And so I think just ending those slides, I was also tasked with some obstacles which haven't shown up here on the slides. Tony, I didn't double check these slides. Do you want me to talk a little more quickly about some of these obstacles? Or I know that others are tasked with that as well.
Sure. Why don't we? I believe I have those in some upcoming slides. So why don't we come back to that if you have other things to add?
Okay, sure. So I think we'll circle back to the list of obstacles, which are many, and I think people know well, but we can certainly answer questions or detail those more. I can chime in too if I don't hear the full range from other speakers. But the other task I was charged with is kind of a summary of purpose and use trends for ADUs. Speaking to your question of whether the ADUs we're seeing are really becoming affordable housing. And that's a point I'd like to touch on, that We are seeing a range of uses. So we're certainly seeing everything. But what we're seeing without nonprofit targeted kind of intervention to reach out to lower income homeowners, that we're seeing that the market ADUs kind of left on their own without intervention, a lot of those are being built by higher income residents who have access to cash and access to the technical support to get through the expensive pre-development hurdles. And often these are family housing and guest housing and not necessarily going to pan out into affordable rentals. And even if they wanted to rent these houses, a lot of them at a higher cost, larger spaces, maybe higher level of design, aren't necessarily going to be even moderate income affordable rentals. So we're really cognizant of that, that an ADU isn't necessarily a win when we're talking about affordable housing. So part of the discussion needs to be how we can help lower income homeowners build these units at a lower cost and price point that they can get a return on investment, and along with that provide actual affordable housing. And so that's the challenge that I think we all need to be focused on in the real world of affordable housing, how we're going to kind of keep focused on those lower end units that isn't necessarily the natural market production place. So with that, I think I will pass it on to the next speaker, and I'll be here to chime in and answer questions. Thank you very
So
much.
much, Anne. Brenda and Rosie.
Hi, good morning. Thanks for having us today. And I'm Rosie Deisty here with my colleague Brenda Beltz. We're both project planners with the city of Santa Barbara. And we were both sort of partners in our accessory dwelling unit ordinance and ordinance amendments over the last few years. You could go to the next slide. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about some statistics for our cities on ADU production, discuss how our standards are a little bit different for inland areas versus coastal zone. I'm going to highlight some of our standards that we relaxed to incentivize ADUs and talk a little bit about code advisories, a little bit about fees, and end with some future efforts we hope to initiate. So next slide. So just starting with the data for the cities, this shows the number of ADUs that have been built or had their certificate of occupancy issued, the number that have had building permits issued, and the number that are pending since sort of a state law changed in 2017 to present day. And so in total, that's 788 units. So it is a lot of units in our city. We're getting a lot of interest in ADUs. Next slide. And then the types of ADUs we're seeing are by vast majority are conversions. That would be garages, rooms, accessory structures, and the like to ADUs, followed by brand new construction detached ADUs at 13%, additions a little bit less, and then people who already had a unit on their property but they want to legalize it is 5% in our city. Next slide. So just to cover a somewhat confusing things about our ordinances, that we both have a inland and a coastal zoning ordinance. And we originally adopted an ADU ordinance in 2018. And at that time, we only amended the inland ordinance because we had plans to submit our entire Title 30 zoning ordinance to the Coastal Commission for certification soon. And so we thought we'll just do this first. But as it turns out, we haven't done that yet. So when state law changed and we needed to do a complete overhaul of our ADU ordinance, we also went ahead this time in 2020 and adopted amendments both to our inland zoning ordinance and our coastal zoning ordinance. But in the coastal zone, you can't implement those rules until the Coastal Commission certifies it. So in the meantime, people are just using state law provisions for ADUs in the coastal zone. So we did submit for a local coastal plan amendment in July 2021, and we're still waiting to hear official Coastal Commission response on that submittal. We're hoping to hear from them soon, but we haven't quite heard from them yet. But what I wanted to highlight on this slide is this is one of the main challenges we've had for city staff and applicants, because interpretation of state law without a local ordinance is really confusing for applicants and staff and the public trying to understand all the rules. And then because of all these ordinances and amendments and 2 zoning ordinances, staff has to juggle 4 different sets of regulations depending on when somebody submitted their application and where the project is located. So applicants are sometimes caught in the middle of all this, and it's not very good for anyone involved. So hopefully we'll get everything through the coastal zone, and then we'll have just 2 sets of rules that mirror each other pretty much. Actually, on the next slide, I'll talk a little bit how the coastal zone is different from inland. And this slide just shows where our coastal zone is located in the city. So the vast majority of ADU applications, or most of our land, is inland, but we do have a number of neighborhoods in the coastal zone with ADUs as well. Next slide. So when you're in the coastal zone, we do have some specific rules that are different from inland areas. First, accessory dwelling unit law, state law doesn't supersede the Coastal Act, so we can't allow these units in locations that would conflict with coastal resource protection policies. So those are environmentally sensitive habitat areas and habitat buffers, things like that. Furthermore, if somebody's adding an ADU onto a house or garage, they have to comply with current setbacks and coastal resource protection buffers. So we have numeric setbacks in our coastal land use plan from creeks, monarch butterfly sites, oak woodlands, things like that. Also, our public access portion of the coastal land use plan has a number of off-street parking standards, and those are so we do not impact public access to the shoreline and coastal recreation areas. So because of those policies, if somebody is converting their garage to an ADU, they do have to replace that parking on site, and you do not have to do that in inland areas. And then we also have something called key public access parking areas that are mapped in our coastal land use plan. And for those areas, on-site parking for the ADU is required. But that only affects a few residential streets in the coastal zone that are close to beach access areas and parks. Next slide. So next I'm going to cover some of the incentives that we do offer to promote ADUs in our city. So first is our open yard requirements. So we do not require an open yard for accessory dwelling unit in any case. And then but there is an open yard requirement for the primary unit, but that can be reduced to accommodate ADUs so that people have room to put one in their backyard. Also, we allow that open yard area to be located in driveway and turnaround areas, whereas, for a single family unit, we don't allow that. So we sort of relax some of our standards in order to allow people to have space to put an ADU on their lot. Next slide. And then for setbacks, so many of the homes and accessory structures in our city are non-conforming to current setbacks. So usually if an owner wanted to convert, their garage or an accessory dwelling to something else or demolish and rebuild it, they'd have to conform to current setbacks. But for ADU, any existing non-conforming structures can be converted to an ADU in its current non-conforming location. Although if somebody's adding an addition onto that project as well, the addition portion of it would need to conform to what are typically 4-foot rear and side setback standards. And those are the same standards that are allowed in state law for ADUs. Also, we do allow a non-conforming structure to be demolished and rebuilt in the same location as an ADU, and then they can add on a small conforming addition. And the other thing we allow is an existing non-conforming garage can be demolished and rebuilt, and then they can add an ADU on top, as long as that ADU on top conforms to the 4-foot side and rear setbacks. Next slide. So we have a couple of parking incentives. So we don't require replacement parking for garage and carport conversions, at least in the inland areas. Like I mentioned, there's some differences in the coastal zone. And that's consistent with state law. But we also offered an incentive that we adopted, and we relaxed parking requirements for all ADUs, not just those that are in a half mile of transit that is allowed per state law. Although some of the high fire hazard areas do require on-site parking for ADUs for public safety reasons. And there are those public access areas in the coastal zone I already mentioned. If somebody, though, wants to have a parking space on their site, let's say they converted their garage and they want to replace it on site, we relaxed our standards so they could allow that replacement parking in the front or interior setback. And we also allow tandem parking in some situations where it's safe to do so. Next slide. Some of the most common things we get asked about building code advisories and things like that, I put on this slide. So as you can see, garage conversions are really popular in our city, and they can be less expensive. But people need to know that garages were not built to house people. So they do trigger building code upgrades, structural upgrades. Sometimes a new foundation is required, a heating system, insulation, things like that. So it's something just to be aware of. Also that maybe your existing utility services aren't made for another unit, and so that needs to be upgraded. We get asked a lot about soils reports, and that's in our Muni code that we do require that for new structures and additions that are over 500 square feet. Fire sprinklers are required in the ADU if the primary dwelling also has a fire sprinkler requirement. And per state law, new detached ADUs require solar panels. Next slide. We also get asked a lot about fees and what happens to property tax. The fees for ADUs, city charge fees are really complicated, and it depends on the size of the ADU and things like that. So I'm not going to cover that here, but we do get asked about school fees. And those are charged by our school district for ADUs that are over 750 square feet. The most recent fee I could find online was $3.79 per square foot. And that's charged for elementary school districts and also, again, for secondary school districts. And when someone does construct an ADU, as far as their property tax goes, the county assessor will appraise the value of the ADU, and then they combine that into a blended assessment with the primary home. And also, water meters is something we get asked about a lot, and we do not require new water meters. But if somebody wants one, they're pretty costly. It can be $7,000 to $17,000, depending on the number of new water fixtures. Next slide. So here I wanted to highlight some of the resources we have in our city for ADUs. We have a dedicated webpage, and the address is listed there. And on that webpage, we have a workshop video. We did a workshop in 2020 and had a lot of attendees and a lot of questions. And so that's available to anyone to view online. We've made an ADU guide informational packet and a supplemental application. We keep an up-to-date project map, and it just pinpoints all the locations in the city where people have applied for ADUs. And we do have a direct email line to ADU experts, a mailbox that we take all kinds of questions there and try to answer them as soon as possible. Next slide. So I wanted to highlight a little bit what's in our ADU guide. We do have frequently asked questions, and we detail all the zoning rules for ADUs. We do have two main categories of ADUs in the city. We call them standard ADUs and special ADUs, and all the rules for those are listed here. ADUs in our city are subject to a checklist of administrative design criteria. It's basically objective standards that staff just check to make sure the ADU complies with them. We list all the options for people who want to do one ADU, or maybe they want to do multiple ADUs. and we offer code tips for a successful application. Next slide. And then I wanted to end on some of the things we want to work on or continue to work on to continue to promote ADUs in our city. One thing I am looking for are photos of constructed ADUs. I put out a call to local architects to submit photos of their ADUs. I only got one architect responding, so if any are in the audience and want to keep sending me photos, my email address is there. We like to use those photos in events like this or and highlight them on our webpage. We hope to partner with Coastal Housing Coalition and others to do a really good expanded design, permit, and construction guide for ADUs, so we can really help homeowners who really don't know where to start often, and we think this could be really helpful. I put a pre-approved plans down with a question mark. It's something we are exploring and are really interested in. Like to hear from other cities and counties and see if they have helped applicants. So it's something we're interested in looking into. And then we are undergoing a housing element update. And with that update, we need to look into how to incentivize ADUs with affordable rents. That's something that was touched on in the previous presentation. And we'd be interested in knowing how to get ADUs in the moderate or lower income categories, because we've found in our city rents are really, really high, and ADUs are brand new construction and they're charging really high rents. We can't say at this moment that they are charging moderate rents or low income rents. And also we want to look into, this was something that was promoted by our planning commission, but for people who have mixed use development, some applicants may want to convert the commercial space, if it's not doing well, to ADUs, and we wanted to develop some standards for doing that. So with that, I'll conclude our presentation.
Great, thank you so much, Rosie. Really appreciate it. As a practitioner, I know that in the weeds, it can get really complicated and nuanced, and it's difficult to parse through everything, what's allowed for each circumstance. But I do credit the city. I think you guys have a really great ordinance. It's as far as they go, it's very it's one of the better ones I've come across for sure, and really looking forward to opportunities to have the private and nonprofit sector contribute to helping some homeowners with that educational aspect. So next we have Jimmy Paulding of the City of Arroyo Grande.
Thank you, Tony. Pleasure to be here today. And I'll be speaking from the perspective of an Arroyo Grande City Council member, as well as a member of the SLO County Task Force, ADU Task Force that Ann Wyatt spoke of today. And I'll talk about some barriers that we've seen locally among our 8 jurisdictions, as well as some of the solutions that we see. Before I jump into the slides, I want to just say that one of the conversations I have repeatedly is with fellow elected officials here on the Central Coast, and they've identified affordable housing as a priority and ADUs as a means to getting there, but oftentimes it hasn't been made a staff priority. And so one of my pitches to any elected that's here is just really make sure that that we're putting our money or our resources where our mouth is. And that requires top-down alignment from the electeds to the city management, to the department heads, to staff. And so that's been one of the things that our task force has really been focusing on in a proactive way to encourage that to take place. I've got a few other comments, but I'll interject those throughout the slides. So we'll talk about the lack of public understanding of opportunities surrounding ADUs, some of the design planning and construction constraints, as well as permitting, obviously, constraints related to funding, finance, and lending, some technical hangups, and then ongoing ADU management concepts. Next slide, please. So when we talk about lack of public awareness about opportunities, I get it all the time as a council member where people, don't understand what an ADU is. They don't understand what the process is, but oftentimes they really may have the resources to actually build one. So one of the things we've done at a local level, and was mentioned by Rosie as a potential objective for the city of Santa Barbara, is work towards developing a pre-approved construction plan layout program. And so that's one program that the four cities here on the Central Coast and then the county have partnered to create basically similar programs that will really help make that easier on your average resident, reduce costs by saving money on the design. And when I talk to residents about that, they get really excited. So I think that if those, we've seen a number of jurisdictions throughout the state of California implement them with mixed success. Happy to talk during the Q&A about how our program's going and look to see that it's successful. Education and outreach is just huge. Locally here, our task force developed a white paper. I think as Anne mentioned, one of the recommendations was to fund nonprofit partner capacity to serve as a one-stop shop for both the public, for jurisdictions, for the private sector, to really be able to share resources, educate the public, and move on the objective of building more ADUs. Another challenge is lack of policy maker awareness. As I was speaking to that issue, I think in addition to awareness, it's lack of resources. The city of AG, we're a small city, 18,000 residents. We have a small community development department. It's been difficult to move on priorities that we just frankly don't have the resources to move on. And so again, I see the solution as building that nonprofit partner capacity to help deliver. Lack of understanding of the environmental benefits over other types of housing. I think the concept of political will is really important, and political capital, in the sense that I think ADUs are one of the most low impact infill solutions that can really move toward our affordable housing goals. And I really think, at least in San Luis Obispo County, out of all 8 jurisdictions, the political will is there, and it doesn't take much political capital to essentially to build these ADUs. And so if those things are all aligned, then the question is, why aren't we building more of them? Next slide, please. Another challenge is jurisdiction, being compliant versus helpful, and really providing that good customer service over the county or over the counter. We've got 8 jurisdictions. Of those, about half hadn't, as of when we were doing the work of the task force, hadn't updated their ADU ordinances to comply with state law. So you've just got that added layer of complexity for the design and building community, for homeowners trying to go through that process and getting these discretionary decisions made by staff trying to navigate that process when it should be ministerial by per state law. So cleaning up those ordinances, making sure that they comply, has been a big objective of the task force, and it's been working. Almost all the jurisdictions now have moved in that direction, if not already approved updated zoning ordinances. That creates that consistency across the board for the building community to be able to work toward realistic expectations. And some of the other ideas here, it's again in terms of customer service. How do we promote user-friendly digital applications and approval processes, free accessible ADU pre-approval meetings to promote a successful application process, provide fast pass certification or process for industry professionals and experience in permitting and building code compliance. One of the things that our planning commission at the Rio Grande level has done is recommended we actually create a pre-approved, pre-qualified list of ADU manufacturers where people could apply to essentially build, or not even build, but install one of these offsite, pre-approved manufactured homes. And I think that's one avenue for expediting the permitting process. I hope that when my city council hears the ordinance, that we agree to include that in the ordinance. Limited coordination between jurisdictions. Again, we need that regional leadership. That is the role of the COGS of the county to bring the jurisdictions together to, again, create that consistency, but share resources like we're doing with this pre-approved construction plan program. We have one city as the lead agency, but the other cities are sharing resources, and we've used regional funds actually through our COG to help fund that regional program. Next slide, please. Some other challenges, obviously Rosie was speaking to the nuance with the coastal zone and inland planning versus coastal zone planning. I think that there is some opportunity for collaboration and partnership with the County of Santa Barbara and San Luis Obispo and our jurisdictions to help work with the Coastal Commission to create a process that really streamlines these to the extent possible. I know that there's a lot of nuance there. I won't get into the details, but we have seen some work done by the city of San Diego in that area. And I'll just mention as an aside, all of these solutions and challenges are identified in our white paper. And maybe, Tony, you could link that in the chat. So if people want to read in more depth, you can there. Next slide, please. Another challenge is obviously water sewer capacity with our CSDs. We want to look at the regional picture. We want to determine how we can move forward and build more ADUs, and that's oftentimes a constraint. And the CSDs aren't really involved in that conversation. So how do you get the CSDs, their leadership, their management into the discussion is an important objective. Again, we want to streamline across the board to the extent possible. Next slide, please. Manufactured ADUs, I talked about as a potential challenge, mentioned that as a potential solution. There's again a lot of nuance there. One of the discussions we had at the Planning Commission level in AG was whether to require the second unit to match the color, style, architecture of the primary unit, and our Planning Commission recommended against that because it would be prohibitive for a number of pre-designed, pre-manufactured units that are aesthetically pleasing to look at. And so how can we make policies like that that don't unnecessarily prohibit a particular option for people? Confusing between terms, primary, secondary, ADU, JADU. I think what Rosie was sharing with the city of Santa Barbara, that really clear application process is something that we can all do as jurisdictions to just really communicate exactly what ADUs are, what the process is, and simplify it to the extent possible. Next slide, please. Funding, finance and lending. We have some challenges. We have some opportunities there. We really should coordinate with our local banks, credit unions, nonprofits to create loan programs. We've done that here. The task force led by Ann Wyatt has facilitated that with one of our local credit unions, particularly for lower income homeowners who wouldn't otherwise qualify for traditional loans. There's some higher level lobbying efforts that we need to perform as it relates to Freddie Mac in terms of recognizing income-based appraisals for properties with ADUs. Definitely some bigger fish to fry there, but we've made a lot of progress. We'd be happy to share how we went about building that network. And then in terms of the cost of ADUs, I mean, that's huge. So how can we bring down that cost? How can we focus on as I think Rosie mentioned too, how do we incentivize, people to actually rent out with affordable rents? There are ways to do that, and hopefully we can get into that in the Q&A. Next slide, please. Another challenge is just limited funding resources for the regional collaborative efforts. And as I mentioned, how do we fund that and build that nonprofit partner capacity? So one of the things as an elected that I've been able to accomplish is getting our city council to allocate American Rescue Plan Act funds to SmartShare for them to provide a whole host of one-stop shop services for our community. We were the first jurisdiction out of the 8, and I'm hoping that the other 7 jurisdictions follow suit, because I think that there's a direct nexus in terms of, again, helping the people that were disproportionately impacted by the pandemic with lower cost affordable housing through implementation of ADU programs. So, Next slide, please. And some technical hangups, obviously soils expense related to site borings. How can we create standardized soil types or accept area, standards to streamline that process? We have issues with boundary surveys, being a huge cost for some applicants, septic calculations and allowances, fire sprinkler requirements, solar requirements. Sometimes the intent is good. It's a health and safety intent, or it's an intent to create more renewable energy, yet it becomes this cost burden that then dissuades the applicant from actually building. So we really need to take a relook at our policies and examine those across the board. Next slide, please. Utility connection fees, again, another area. Can we reduce those? Let's look at the policy intent. Let's rethink it. Building codes, for pre-approved plan programs, we need to make sure that there's a process in place for whoever's, stamping those plans, that they're going to relook at those plans on a yearly basis, make sure that they continue to comply with building codes and the updates. And then RHNA requirements and affordability covenants. It's a huge one. I'm sure we'll talk in the Q&A about, deed restrictions as opposed to, just the more, supply and demand discussion. And if the more we build, X percentage are going to end up being, rented out to be at an affordable level. And so next slide. A lot of slides, so I'm trying to go as fast as I can. I apologize for the speed. And then, finding and screening tenants, managing tenant relations can be a challenge for homeowners. That's something that SmartShare has been doing. They actually have their home share program that they've been able to leverage. And so we need to, again, think holistically about those kinds of things and plan for them. So I think that was my last slide. Let me just make sure I didn't have any other follow-up notes. Just think about the jurisdictions in your community that might be lagging. Think about how these regional solutions can help kind of catch them up. Obviously, the city of Santa Barbara has made a lot of progress, but again, let's build that nonprofit partner capacity. Let's look at funding sources like, economic development funds, ARPA funds, things like that, and let's move. So thanks so much for being here today, and happy to answer any questions later.
Thank you so much, Jimmy. Really, really good information, and appreciate your leadership on this topic. So next, we're going to go to Celeste Boyer. Celeste?
I should be visible soon.
You're good to go.
Okay. Thanks to our host and to our other panelists for presenting that great information. Really appreciate your mission enthusiasm. It's great to hear. I'm with the Casita Coalition, and we are a statewide group that's composed of people across the spectrum, from builders, planners, policymakers, nonprofits, and people in the academic world working who share this mission that small housing can help us with our with California's affordability issues to become a better state where we can all thrive. So I'm going to share some brief notes about our brief notes from our 2021 Best Practices webinar series. And in it, we invited jurisdictions who are really digging in and finding solutions. They generously shared their lessons learned and the things they've found that works. Our next one, indeed, is tomorrow, November 19th, and we're going to be spotlighting the city of Oakland. So that'll be fun. Please join us. You can go to Eventbrite and search for Casita Coalition to register for that. And then today we don't have time to do more than just a brief run over an overview. But we'll have more detail on December 17th when we will do a year-end compilation of highlights from our entire year of webinars. So please go to Eventbrite and register for that one as well if you're interested in. And we also have a full archive of these webinars on our YouTube channel. So you can go to YouTube and search for Casita Coalition. They're also on our website at casitacoalition.org. Next slide, please. So in looking at the jurisdictions who share their information with us, we can we can roughly categorize their best practice efforts into these three pools of policy, process, and the public or public facing elements. There would be some overlap, of course. So this presentation will look at those three areas and how they can help encourage ADU production. Next slide. And these seem to be the essentials. Internal mission alignment, and as Jimmy said, starting from the top with elected officials, instructing staff to focus resources and their time on ADU production. Also, if the directives can include accountability and require follow-up with showing results of, say, streamlining efforts or incentive programs, so that that information goes back to the electeds, and then further directives can be made. So internal mission alignment includes regular staff training, and a whole host of things that keep a unified voice for the ADU process in the jurisdiction. Clear compliant codes, obviously, objective development standards, so that anyone reading a paragraph would have the same the subjective viewpoint would not be required. It would be measurable numbers, things that anyone would interpret the same way. And then of course, your external facing info has got to be clean, simple, and complete. And that's a challenge because people need to know different things along different parts of the journey of understanding. So next slide. And if you look at it from the point of view of the homeowner, you could see that it has these three main portions. So in the inspiration section, people are just curious. They want to know what an ADU could do for them. What do they look like? What are their neighbors doing? And here, idea books with both plans and personal stories of ADU builders, press releases that tell stories of specific homeowners can really be helpful in that broad range of outreach when you're first, when you want to capture the people who are first thinking about it. And then you get into more detail with the education phase, and process charts are helpful, checklists, decision trees, if this, then that, handouts, workshops, and webinars, such as this one, are wonderful tools. But then finally, you need to actually assist them. And here's where nonprofit partners can be super helpful, where internal dedicated contacts and teams can be helpful. We love that Santa Barbara's using the dedicated email for ADU questions and having regular ADU hours. Next slide, please. And never underestimate the power of stories, and that goes for everything in life, I think. And here are some examples of Napa Sonoma ADU. I think the bottom is a private builder, and some others who are using stories of specific individuals and how ADUs helped them and their families. Incredibly powerful. We know that humans are story-based creatures. Next slide. So beyond the essentials, a lot of jurisdictions are having success with things like dedicated ADU hours each week. Most of them are appointment-based, but they can also be an open hour, where you have representatives from all the authorizing agencies there. Community workshops, of course, and then those partnerships with the nonprofits who have more resources given funding to help with hands-on client work and to help with things like tenant screening and agreements that the planning department obviously doesn't have. That's not in their parameters. And then incentives. All kinds of things are being tried for incentives. So we'll get into that a little more later. Next slide, please. Now, just to start some specific examples quickly, the City of San Diego has a number of very good best practices, and certainly starting with their community outreach, which took place over a number of years, and they really focused on it, and they assigned it to everyone, but dominantly the Assistant Director of Development, who got out into the community, especially those communities who were going to need more help because they were lower income. And he brought along panelists, including the county tax assessor, to answer those common homeowner questions. So the outreach is incredibly important. And their bonus program is going great guns. So shout out to the City of San Diego for doing a great job and having the result with excellent numbers of ADU production. Next slide. City of San Francisco, multi-agency checklist, a high point among other parts of their program. And their 1 or 2 page handout here has the hours, the addresses, and the contact info with live links to the not many, but the several agencies that are involved in a permit application. So the homeowner doesn't have to go chasing around to find this information on multiple web pages. Next slide. City of San Jose similarly has an ADU universal checklist, which covers all the different authorizing agencies and is written as a decision tree. So if your lot is this, then you can or cannot, etc. Very, very readable and helpful. And they have a dedicated ADU ally with an email address. And just seeing that, a homeowner to see that, proves to them that they're dealing with someone who shares their goals for their project and is not allied against them, which they sometimes fear going into this. Next slide. The City of Encinitas has a permit-ready ADU plan program, and a standout element of this one is that you can homeowners can change the window location and door location without needing to get it re-approved. And so obviously, due to the yard layout, some customization of almost every plan will be required, causing more or less cost to the homeowner. But some of the cities out there have that built in. And also with pre-approved plans, it's important to build in that the architect involved update them for code changes every year. Next slide. Partnering with an ADU nonprofit, Smart Share obviously is a great example of that up in SLO County. And then Hello Housing has a number of programs where they're helping homeowners with a one-stop shop. Incredibly useful to have these public-private partnerships. Next slide. And the County of San Mateo is doing great work with their unpermitted unit program. And I was very impressed to see that 71% of the ADUs in Santa Barbara are conversions. So it is a large element. And while they're not always going to be affordable, as Ann pointed out, they're more likely to be because the costs can be less. So the San Mateo program focuses on some of the real basics that are involved with this work, which is that unit is already functioning as housing. No one wants that to be lost, at least not permanently. And then that the homeowners are generally really relying on that rental income for their financial stability, and they rarely have deep financial resources to do expensive revisions. So I would suggest, if you're looking at starting your own unpermitted unit amnesty program, checking out the County of San Mateo, because they've been very thoughtful about proceeding with all these tricky details. Next slide, please. And incentives and bonuses, lots of things are being tried, a lot of them with pilot programs. So many of them have affordability components, and that can be more or less challenging based on how you structure it. So they are sometimes done as density bonuses. For instance, the City of San Diego, as I mentioned, for every deed restricted ADU, you can build another one. And sometimes if you rent for a voucher holder for 7 years, you have reduced impact fees for them. There are various loan programs or free project management. City of Ross offers a little more, another 200 square feet for 20-year affordability contract. This is a work in progress, as all these best practices are. You know, these are new programs, and we're all learning together on this. So we'll be revising these best practice notes as we go along, as we all share knowledge. So take that with all of these with a grain of salt, and join the Casita Coalition or keep track of our webinars to learn updates on how some of these pilots are working out. For instance, family flexibility is a huge element of why someone builds an ADU, particularly people as they want to age in place. They recognize that having extra income coming in or having a place to downsize into so they can perhaps rent out their main home or have family live there This flexibility is huge, particularly for people in their 60s who might have already a lot of equity built up and be able to build an ADU. To ask them for a 20-year affordability contract is pretty tough, pretty tough. So a best practice might be to keep that as short as you can to maximize flexibility. Now, there are going to be some younger families for whom, if they're in their 40s, 20 years, they can rent that. They're happy with that. That's their goal for it. Then they figure down the road in their 60s, they can make changes. But just a note on deed restrictions, agreements, and other covenants to keep in mind from the homeowner's point of view, all of the benefits they hope to get from their ADU. Next slide. Financing, as everyone has touched on, is a challenge. Maximize that flexibility. Work with a portfolio lender who has more flexibility for the terms of their loan and might be able to include the future rent toward their income, allowing more people to qualify. Also, sometimes if you can partner with a nonprofit and the lender on project management, that can be very helpful to all involved. Obviously, when you have a lender involved, they want to make sure it gets to final and gets that tenant moved in. So partnering with a nonprofit can be helpful to all parties there. And some of those points I already touched on. Next slide. So what are other people trying with finance programs? HCD has a great list of some of the other incentives out there. I encourage you to go to the HCD, just search for HCD ADU, that's Housing and Community Development website. More and more, they have wonderful resources with information for programs and for homeowners. Next slide. And here are some other great resources. On the left, I show the HCD Accessory Dwelling Unit Handbook, super detailed and excellent. And then at the top is a screenshot from the aducalifornia.org, which has a map of ADUs constructed throughout the state in different categories, but also a terrific list of best practices with links to a lot of programs in various categories of best practices. And then AARP has done a wonderful guidebook called the ABCs of ADUs. They have some good videos. They partnered with us on a video called Why ADU. And they definitely get that connection between aging in place and the benefits of ADUs, and are working to help their demographic understand the opportunities involved. Next slide. And here's some of the success stories we've had from 800 units a year in 2013 to 13,000 units in 2020 across the state. These are very encouraging numbers. And another thing I want to share with you is that over the last 2 years, right around $1 billion in venture capital money has gone into factory-built home companies. So those people working in modular, prefab, panelized, 3D printing, other technologies that build homes or panels off-site. Venture capitalists are betting on them in a big way. So right now there are some constraints with both labor and supply sources. But I think when those start to loosen up, we're going to hopefully see a cost of prefab units come way down, and that should help the lower income and nonprofits with uptake of these programs that will really broaden the reach of ADU opportunity here. Next slide. So that's about it. Thank you to the other panelists again, and to our hosts. The Casita Coalition welcomes you to check out our website and join us if you wish. We're a group just working to make sure small housing can increase opportunity for Californians and help us, move on and achieve more in our lives and our economy. So join us and add our voice. We have had your voice. We have some great new member tools that we'll be releasing very soon to help people both create ADUs and understand more about them. So members will have access to those resources. And thank you again. I really appreciate the opportunity to share. And there's a lot more detail in our full webinar series. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Celeste, and thank you so much to all of our panelists today. Really appreciate all the work and effort that each of you guys do in advocating for ADUs and workforce housing in our communities. At this time, I'd like to invite all of our panelists to come back on. We're going to kind of open it up for Q&A and discussion. I want this to be a kind of a free-form dialogue. I know that there were lots of questions and lots of additional insights that each of you have. We kind of scratched the surface with a lot of these presentations. Hoping we can kind of dive into a few of those further and ultimately kind of continue this dialogue as we move forward here in the county of Santa Barbara. So one of my first questions that I'll kind of throw out there is that I had the opportunity to attend one of the SLO County Task Force's meetings earlier this year, and I was really inspired at kind of the breadth and variety of stakeholders that are involved, including planners and architects, lenders, construction professionals, and government officials of varying levels. I'm curious how this community-wide focus and effort has helped ADU policy implementation in SLO County. Maybe how has it hindered? What are the sort of best roles for the different sectors to play in this conglomerate? And how can we potentially replicate that here in Santa Barbara?
A lot of questions in there. Maybe I'll start, and then Celeste and Jimmy, who have been involved in this effort, would certainly add on maybe some more components of attempted answer. So I think there's a role for everyone in this opportunity of what ADUs can provide our communities toward meeting our housing goals, and to the jurisdictions toward meeting their obligations for housing options. So there's a place for everyone. It's important, I think, to realize that people come with so many different roles that maybe designers such as yourself at RRM, Tony, maybe they may have a different perspective on the opportunities. For example, at SmartShare as an affordable houser, really pushing small, basic affordable units, particularly garage conversions. We have an interest in kind of cutting out the high design component and keeping those real simple with draftsmen. So that may not serve the interests of the designer architect community so much. So I think recognizing some of those differing interests is important, but then there's a role for everything. We're certainly not opposed to higher end, better designed new units either. And so some of that there. As far as meeting the community's goal, I think the general alliance of interest and specialty really helps us identify challenges and think of ways we can overcome them, and maybe provide a more pressure community sort of push to getting codes changed and aligned and getting funding. So certainly the alliance of our different specialty areas, having Jimmy on board as a policymaker to understand this challenge of getting funding has been very helpful. And so with that, other comments, Jimmy, Celeste?
Yeah, I would just add to that. And I mean, looking back at where we, you, myself, and Celeste kind of co-founding the ADU task force, we were faced with a pandemic, right? Where people were hurting more than ever. And it's like, okay, what are the lowest cost solutions for housing that we can be implementing? Okay, look no further than ADUs. We were looking at alignment with certain programs like our regional early action program through SLOCOG, so there were funding sources. And then I think it was just a matter of let's get everybody to the table, and it was that outreach exercise of okay, let's get the building community, let's get the design community, let's get planners, let's get elected officials, let's try to just get everybody in the room. This nonprofit public-private partnership to essentially build a coalition, and so I think that's what we were able to do. The work is still there to be done, but we've made a lot of progress, and I think it's really about, again, like I mentioned earlier today, it's that building the nonprofit and public sector and private capacity within the community to deliver. Oh, and one other thing, setting goals. We started off with a pretty robust goal of let's build all the units that we say we're going to build in our RHNA, and let's try to do it in the course of that period of time. And I don't think we're meeting those goals, but to the extent that we can align the community around, like we're saying in SLO County, we're going to build 800 units every 2 years, essentially. And we're not meeting that goal or getting anywhere close. So let's talk about the goal. Let's talk about, and then work our way backwards to meeting that goal. And it's going to take everybody.
I don't know that I have much to add to that, except to say that, of course, the task force is important to raise the profile, to just to actively demonstrate the commitment to everyone of everyone involved to the ADUs. That's important, that we had a range of stakeholders participating. But as Anne said, everyone's going to have their different motivations for involvement. But understanding what the process is to get an ADU built in your county is super important, and identifying the challenges as we did in the white paper when I was aligned with SmartShare is key, and working together. So that's obviously the task force's goal is to collaborate. And when we're also stressed with our strapped resources, it can be hard to make the time to collaborate, but it's absolutely key to get anything done.
Thank you, guys. A quick follow-up on that one. I was also really impressed at the regionally coordinated implementation plan of the majority of all the different agencies within SLO County. What were the major challenges and benefits to going that route, and how has it been going? I know that it's still in the works.
You want to take that, Anne, before I do?
Sure. Again, I'll start on that and look for more input. So we recognize housing doesn't, as I think everyone knows, the no-brainer. Housing doesn't sort of respect jurisdictional boundaries, and so there's a need to coordinate. It's a difficult one when policymakers kind of responses need to respect jurisdictional boundaries. So getting different agencies with different types of work standards and goals to coordinate has been tricky. So I'm not sure that we could gauge a high level of success on this yet, but it's something that takes constant effort and is an ongoing process. So to the degree that we set some groundwork and some organizational sort of goal to keep creating the regional sort of outlook, and getting SLOCOG involved, our regional agency kind of in on that will be helpful. So more on current success, Jimmy, you want?
Well, I would just say, yeah, like I mentioned earlier, getting the jurisdictions to actually prioritize updating the ADU ordinances to comply with state law, I think that's partially a win that we can claim at this point, that at least each is moving or has already moved on that. And then looking forward, we have programs in place like the pre-approved floor plan program. So in a year from now, we should be able to look back and say, okay, we have that program in place. It's working. It's a success. We've funded the nonprofit partner capacity. SmartShare is fully mobilized and providing all of these resources to the community. And we're now starting to see an uptick in our numbers of ADUs that we're building. So yeah, it's all in real time. And I think the current thing that I'm dealing with is how to get the other jurisdictions to follow suit with the city of Arroyo Grande and allocate ARPA funds, because each jurisdiction has their own approach to how they're going to do that, and it's complicated, but it seems like we're going to get there, and I'm hopeful.
And one example that's out there is the County of San Mateo found some funding, and they created a website called 21 Elements, which is a regional coordination effort of the 21 jurisdictions in their area to try to get on the same page with ADU. So you might want to check out that. It's literally called 21elements.org, I guess, or .com. But so there are people who are managing to corral the cats in this way.
Yeah. Celeste, why don't you stay on? I got a question for you. So I understand that HCD limits the amount of ADUs that can be used toward meeting their RHNA goals, unless there's demonstrated trend and incentivized policies. Are there a few specific policies that have been most acceptable to HCD and that have also started to prove most effective in incentivizing ADU production?
I don't know that I have the answer to the restricting the numbers if they're not in compliance, but I do know, as we're all aware, that the state requirement is that jurisdictions have programs to incentivize and encourage. So we believe that technical assistance program with a nonprofit is a great way that is demonstrated to help add ADU numbers. And so that is one thing that Casita Coalition is very much focusing on, and HCD is recognizing as effective. There are many other incentive programs as well that will qualify a jurisdiction for that component. But again, HCD is really approachable, and they have contact info on their website. You can ask them questions directly, whether you're a builder, a homeowner, or a jurisdiction. We encourage you to do that.
Brenda and Rosie, I'm curious if you know, in what way can the nonprofit and maybe professional community assist the city in helping toward that? It sounds like primarily education, but are there other things that you're seeing kind of as boots on the ground that would be helpful?
I guess I'll start. I think, again, like I mentioned, we do want to work with the community to expand information for homeowners, especially those that are just starting out and don't even know where to begin. Working on checklists and things like that that'll be helpful for them. Brenda, do you have anything you want to add?
No, just all the suggestions that we've heard so far sound great. I love the idea of a task force and technical assistance, loan assistance, or partnering with a nonprofit to help find renters. That's kind of something that we hear sometimes. I do get questions a lot about manufactured homes, which we would allow, but we just don't see that many of, and I'm not sure the reasons why, but those would be great to see, more affordable options for people to just get something ready to go. And similar with our idea of the pre-approved designs, we'd love to do that.
I think my other question is related to trying to track trends. Are there policies or practices that we can be doing to sort of get some data on how ADUs are being utilized? I think across the board, a diverse, it can be a very diverse tool for whether it's homeowners or actually adding rental stock. But how important are those? Is that information to kind of creating that feedback loop in the types of policies that we implement?
I'll start on that one. A great resource for that is the Turner Center out of UC Berkeley. They have wonderful reports. They're engaged in the data collection portion of it, and their reports have a lot of information about how ADUs are being used. And so I would start there, and I do think it's important that we know what's naturally occurring in the market, and we know what interventions need to be done to get where we want to go.
I'll second that both some of the statewide studies, such as those that the Turner Center is doing to give us a sort of holistic look at production, and local local studies ongoing are important to test our assumptions. We're kind of guessing about what role ADUs will fill based on a little bit of past knowledge, but it's very limited as we're seeing a lot higher production. And so we do need to do local studies, I would say probably at least every 3 years, to really see what the actual production, what rental rates are, how our affordability assumptions, in our case in San Luis Obispo, a third moderate and half low income affordable, whether those really test out. And then think about how we can meet them, or, well, really, how then we can meet those goals.
And they're doing some good studies up in Portland too, where they've been surprised by the numbers of units that are being offered at very low rents or for free to friends and family. And that is still housing. And it doesn't get much more affordable than free. But a phenomenon at work here, I think also is that having an extra space where someone can stay independently and take care of their own needs may make homeowners more generous with offering housing to others, because we're not that good at sharing housing. So ADUs are kind of a great way to ease ourselves, some portions of our demographic, back into sharing and multi-generational living. So that creates housing, which can be, that's a housing unit that a public agency doesn't have to create. It's a safety net of sorts when you have extra units that can function by being offered to those in need. So let's not discount that totally, even if it's hard to track how they're specifically benefiting our affordability numbers.
Great. Well, thank you guys so much. I want to be cognizant of time and respect your guys' participation here. I want to thank you all so much for your passion and efforts in this field. I want to thank you. I'm hopeful that this kind of inspires some really interesting thoughts and dialogue and partnerships as we move forward. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over back to John Standring to kind of close things out. And thank you again to all the panelists and audience members who attended today.
Great job, guys. That was really insightful. Thank you, Tony. I think it's always interesting to hear different areas that are trying to focus, and we all have the same, goals of what we want to achieve, but there's different ways of doing it. So your insight and your commitment to this is much appreciated. Want to give a special thank you to Gavin Roy. He's been our Zoom host. Gavin Roy Productions, just so everyone knows, is a fantastic, very affordable way to host these Zoom meetings. So Gavin, thank you for all you do. Our final and third speaker series will be in mid-December. It will kind of be a State of the Union for the financial side of what barriers people are facing for workforce housing and going there. So we will have an invite following on that. This will be recorded, so you'll see an email going out on it and going there. If you want to get involved with the Coastal Housing Coalition, feel free to reach out to myself or any of the board members. Other than that, thank you to all of our panelists. We really appreciate your time. Thank you to all of our attendees. And great job, Tony. We really appreciate it. All right, guys, have a good one.
All right, thank you.